Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Thank you for having me as a guest speaker to this prestigious event at National Defense University. I'm very pleased to join you to speak on the subject of peace and conflict resolution. I first would like to congratulate the university and the university president, Lieutenant General Riyasab, for supporting and encouraging such a program. And I'd like to congratulate the colleagues and all the organizers affiliated with this event, particularly Professor Hashmi and Professor Effendi, on organizing and thinking through this very significant event for the university and your audience members. My name is Qamar-ul Huda. I'm speaking from Washington, D.C., and I'm very pleased and honored to ask to speak on a few words on this topic. I also want to reflect just for a moment on the significance of such an event, specifically why such conversations on peace and conflict resolution is critically important. And what I mean specifically is many societies tend to think about progress in economic terms, in terms of military might, in terms of social progress and educational production. They think in terms of the growth product of the economy. All of these, of course, are important indicators, and they invest in these progress indicators. I would suggest, very importantly, that when a society does not fundamentally include or factor in how peace will be achieved in this progress, in this development of a nation, then there's always a possibility of losing all that was achieved and relapsing to a state of stagnant situations. So it's very important that this conversation be thought of not just a moment of random conversations on peace and conflict resolution, but it's thought of as an integral contribution to the institutions of Pakistan at large, and what individuals can do to insist on their own personal contributions, on investing in these institutions, as well as other communities. Peace is not something that arrives one day or in 50 years. Peace is a process of active, conscientious, individual and collective process, thinking of holistic ways of ensuring that there is complete and utter degree of peaceful relations with all of creation, peaceful relations with the environment, with your family members on a personal level, on a collective level, peaceful relations with your colleagues, with other institutions, socially, in the media, education, and development. So I wanted to just add that this conversation is incredibly important on many levels, and I'd like our audience members to think about one question throughout the day and throughout the symposium, which is, after all this information that is shared and all the conversations you have and all the participatory events you'll have and exercises and simulations, could we think about this? What is my contribution to bringing peace to my community, to my home, to my local community, to my school, to my workplace, what is my contribution? And how can I refine it? And how can I have a conscious effort in thinking about all of the spheres I operate in, all of the levels that I work in, all of the places as an individual I move through? How do I bring peace to these environments? Inshallah, I'll try to elaborate on this, but it's a question I think is worth asking in these 2 days of the symposium. I also like to add that before moving to the topic of this discipline, that conflict resolution is a very advanced field. There are massive institutions, scholars, researchers, practitioners around the world operating in this professionally. Alhamdulillah, I would say I've been able to combine my academic interest with practitioner interest as well as my interest in changing policies to bring a greater degree of peacemaking. But it's only happened because one is consciously thinking, what is my role and my contribution on earth for the few years I'm on this great planet? And if you commit yourself to doing these things and thinking seriously and self-reflecting about your contribution, I do think that you will commit yourself one way or degree to peacemaking. So another note, both in the East and West, there are approximately 500 universities that offer peace studies of conflict resolution. It goes from bachelor's to master's to PhD. It's in a very established field with many, many approaches: the legal, the sociological field, anthropology, the field of political science, as well as other fields. And there's interdisciplinary fields too. Many folks feed into many massive global institutions like the United Nations or other institutions that work for peace. Anyway, I just do want to say that it is a very significant field. My honest critique is, like many fields that develop, we're dealing with a compartmentalized field. And I'd like you to think about what I'm asking us to critique. And I critique it, self-critique it, but critique the field in honest ways. We need a holistic approach to peace and peacemaking. We need a holistic, structured, if possible, curriculum from pre-kindergarten to university level. We need a structured, integrated approach within the professional levels. Those who study medicine must have integrated approach to studying peace as well as to the medical studies. Same goes for accounting, engineering, and so forth, teaching. Those who do business need to take more than just business ethic courses, but they need to think about how business contributes. What is the role of business in peacemaking, in conflict resolution? Because without peace, business is useless. Without peace, societies suffer and all institutions become stagnant. So why leave it to a compartmentalized field or a few technocrats or bureaucrats or specialists or scholars to think about this, but the rest of society is disengaged? Why do we have that, where we have an enormous number of great brains in the field, but those brains in conflict resolution rarely interact with the legal side, the business side, or all these other sides? So instead of saying that we need to interact with this NGO, that particular field, perhaps the symposium can think about where Pakistan can critically, structurally, institutionally take a new chapter and being a leader in peace, not just for Asia, but all the world, with a holistic approach, inshallah. My comments today is to add to your symposium. Let me start with the definition of conflict and how the field addresses it. About 75 years ago, post World War II, the field erupted to be more of a necessity, and there was a global consensus that experts in the field of conflict resolution were needed in the United Nations and elsewhere. As you can see there, it's also a part of the African Union, it's part of the European Union, it's part of many other transnational institutions. And at the time, they saw conflict as a very basic approach. That is, conflict occurs when two parties essentially coming together and each party has a goal or a position, but that does not meet. They don't meet. And so there is a disagreement or disparity in those goals. That is what they call conflict. So we need to see how the field established conflict as a very simple, basic approach. That is, one, conflict happens between husband and wife, it happens between teacher and student, it happens between colleagues at work, it happens between technocrats and military. There are ideas, and these ideas of individuals come together, and naturally, it's natural for human beings to propose ideas based on self-interest and particular views, but those interests and ideas do not match with the other views of those parties. So that's what's called a conflict. It's a very simple, but expresses the point that conflict is inevitable. Conflict is part of life. In that perspective, it says conflict is essentially a part of existing. Whenever a human being engages with another human being, or they form parties or groups, it will deal with conflict, and they will have to manage conflict. So I did want to put that very basic definition out there because it's really important to think of this as opposed to when we work on conflict between states, when there is sometimes not just disagreement of ideas between one state and another state, but sometimes I find people think of conflict only of violence, when violence is used by gangs or violence is used between armies or states. That is a form of conflict, but there is also non-violent conflict. People are constantly negotiating and bargaining ideas and bargaining their positions to reach some sort of suitable agreement. That's a basic understanding. I also want to add to this definition that the conflict resolution field, peacemaking field, has to and has affirmative says that each person has something valuable to say. Each person, when they come and are engaged, has the ability to articulate and say, I have something to say. Now, when you may disagree with it, you don't like the approach, you don't like the argument, but that person's position or story is incredibly authentic and important and cannot be denied or devalued. And this leads to what I mean. When two positions are not compatible, we're talking about a dialogue that's now meet a sort of position that needs to rethink about itself. So let's talk about the dialogue component of conflict resolution. In dialogue, essentially, it is viewed as the sole way for groups to resolve and minimize any further advancement of a conflict. That you position yourself in a dialogue or discussion and you put a trust in the other party or individual that we are in a part of a engagement and we trust each other, one, to listen, and two, to commit ourselves to solving and resolving the problems on the table. In this dialogue of resolving the existing issues, we also respect the diversity of positions. We respect the diversity of interest. We respect the diversity and needs of the other party. So if person A says, I would like to advance this product in the market of computers, and this person is selling this product, but his team members or her team members do not agree with it, the team members must respect and trust that this conversation is meant for a collective, positive ability to come to a better resolution to it. That there is a process of adding a position, there is a process of listening, and in this process, if I'm engaged in it, all members of the party must commit to listening, adhering to it, and listening with an openness of, I may learn something from this. I have something to gain by learning from this. I don't understand this. This will help my understanding and my thinking. This is a new topic for me. I'm open to learning and self-critiquing myself, to not knowing everything. In this dialogue, there's a dialogue of the internal self, the individual, that I don't know, I should learn. And there's a dialogue of the group. And you're doing multiple navigating of discussions between yourself, trying to understand, and understand where you sit in within that group. Let me recap on the concept of dialogue within conflict resolution. So dialogue is the process of genuine interaction through which human beings listen to each other deeply enough to be changed what they learn. They listen, they're open to think that I may learn from something. In the dialogue process, each person needs to commit themselves to the other concerns, into his picture, even when disagreement happens or persists. So each individual is saying, I'm going to understand where you're coming from. I'm going to put myself in your shoes. I'm going to follow your logic by suspending all of my own biases for a moment, for leaving what I think is the only way, and commit myself to where you're coming from, your position, your perspective. You don't give up your identity. No one gives up yourself or your beliefs or your positions. But what you do is you're recognizing the other person's claims and you're validating that that person has something valuable to say, and you're open to listening and act differently if you learn something. That is how, within the field, dialogue is very crucial to moving from incompatible goals to compatibility goals or positions, or from fixed positions to mutual interest. So through dialogue, you move from disagreement, fixed positions, to finding areas of possible agreed overall interest. And in this process, no one loses or concedes a sense of loss. but instead you're open and interested and invested in learning about the proposed ideas.